Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Saltzman. I'm with OrgVitality. I'm going to be introducing this session and introducing our presenter. I see people are still coming into the room, but let me start by setting this up, and hopefully everybody will be in their places before we really kick it off. So welcome to the session on framing your survey, tactics to get executives excited. I hope everybody is staying healthy in the midst of our pandemic virus attacks here. This is day 2 of our 2-day virtual conference that OV is hosting. The conference in total is on employee well-being and strategic surveys. And there's actually 2 more sessions today after this one. There's one on GDPR and privacy legislation that starts at 3:30. And then at 4:15, there's one on bottom-up, top-down, or blended, which will be presented by both Allstate and PepsiCo in terms of their approach to surveying there. I want to say that most of the sessions we've been doing have been 30 minutes in length. A few go for an hour. And I hope you enjoy this next section. It's an hour session. Most of the sessions that we've been doing have been recorded, but not all of them. And most of the sessions will have the handouts of the material sent to attendees, but not all of them. Their material floating around. There'll be a short feedback session at the end of the webinar, so please take a moment and let us know how we did. And we were just talking about, do we think there's going to be time for a question and answer at the end? We may not have enough time to do it, but if you write down any questions, if we don't get to them, Scott Brooks, who will be the presenter of this session, will respond to you one-on-one. We'll be happy to do that. I also want to mention that at the end of the last session today, we're inviting all participants to stay for a virtual happy hour. Get yourself something to drink, come off mute and chat with other attendees at the conference. We'll be dealing with variety of topics for the last couple of days. Both Jen Acosta from Allstate, who are presenting the last session, and Sach and Jane from PepsiCo are going to stick around. So if you have any specific questions for them after the last session, they'll be happy to answer those as well. If you want to attend the virtual happy hour, just register for the last session at 4:15. If you don't have time to go to that session, you can just click on at 5:15 and join us after the fact. And you can still get to the registration pages through our website. Let me take a moment to introduce Scott Brooks, who's our presenter today. That's Scott there on the left. Scott has a PhD from The Ohio State University in Industrial Organizational Psychology. Scott is one of the founders of OrgVitality. He's also the head of our consulting practice. And I have to say that each and every time that I hear Scott make a presentation, even if it's on the same material that I've heard him present before, I tend to learn a new nugget. So it's always very interesting to hear Scott present on a topic, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy this presentation as well. So with that, take it away, Scott.
Excellent. All right. Well, hi, everybody, and thanks, Jeff. I'm going to start teeing up today's conversation with a real scenario that actually triggered this conversation. Just about a year ago, but still relevant today, I was talking to somebody else who was running a survey program, and they told me about this, where the organization said, hey, employees are our most important assets. I go, okay, that's fine, that's good to know. And then there was a specific statement that came out who was talking about how employee engagement was really critical to our success. And then within about 3 weeks, they said, oh, we're canceling this year's employee survey. Now, it was a year ago, and maybe even since then and during the pandemic, we all can understand how there can be great reasons for canceling or postponing a survey. But just stepping back from maybe what some of the good reasons are, there's a disconnect in this dialogue, you know. And so part of what this webinar does is it's looking at what's the psychology behind this. What can lead smart and rational people to do things that seem fairly odd and maybe a little disconnected? So that's what we're going to get into. Now, we have a starting assumption for this webinar, right? Which is that the ways top leadership thinks, charters, supports, and acts on employee survey results matters. Now, of course, there might be survey activities that you get involved with that might have really zero need for executive support or action or championship. But here and for this session, we're talking about things beyond that. We're talking about efforts that aspire to maybe higher levels of organizational change and transformation. And so that's just setting the stage. So maybe some more examples to lay the groundwork here. Do any of these sound familiar? You work really hard to get executives to admit that employee engagement's important, but then either they change their mind, forget, or just plainly move on to other things. The executive team says it needs more frequent surveys in order to act, but when delivered, there's even less action than before. Or how about this one? In the face of survey results that don't improve fast enough, senior leaders seem to grow frustrated with the process rather than enhancing their role in increasing their leadership messaging, action, or championship. Or the last one, which I kind of referenced a minute ago, but actually has happened a few different times. If you look around, you can see it, where maybe your organization-wide survey is canceled abruptly, even shortly after public statements of the value of employee engagement. So these are all based in some truth and some stories or some scenarios that we've heard about or encountered. What's going on here? How can we explain this? And important to note, we're not talking about leadership bashing here. We have a great deal of empathy for the executive job, right? And one of the points we want to make very clear is that leadership is hard. You could look at all kinds of Harvard Business Review articles, and you could find justification for this statement. You could also say that if leadership weren't so hard, the cartoon wouldn't be so successful. But I'm going to go instead way back to 45 BC in Greece. And here, that's actually a guy named Damocles in this picture, and that's Damocles' sword sitting above his head. And the basic idea is that there's always a sword hanging by a thread just above the throne, but you can't really see it unless you're sitting there. And so what does this mean? It means that the perils of leadership are invisible to all except the leaders themselves. So again, we're starting with a certain empathy for leadership. Now, if your imagery tastes run a little bit more modern, you could simply ask, where is the survey on the leadership radar? And in this case, you know, maybe it's down there. Certainly in your own organizations, if you can find it, your job is that much easier. So what are we doing now? With that set up, have a little patience. We're going to take you to school, and we're going to cover some important psychological concepts, not too hard. There won't be any tests, but we're going to be talking about growth mindset, another sort of mindset type thing called prevention and promotion, and also something called loss aversion. You might have heard about all of these, but they set up how people might think about or frame various kinds of challenges. And today, we're going to weave these into more of a survey-related story or an evidence-based decision-making story. So here we go. We're going to start with growth mindset. What is it? Well, it's really a fundamental belief that certain qualities or abilities can be improved, or that those qualities or abilities can be fixed and not improvable. This is based on some of really fascinating work by a psychologist named Carol Dweck, and originally she was studying kids in school and other developmental kind of settings, but there are some basic truths that have implications and extend way beyond just children. So what is it? You can think about fixed or growth mindset, right? And so if you have a fixed mindset where you believe maybe you can't improve something, like your own ability to do math, let's say, if you're in a school setting, or your ability to act on surveys, your goal is to look smart. And versus if you have a growth mindset that fundamentally you believe that your capabilities are improvable, your goal is not just to look smart and to succeed. Your goal instead is to learn and improve, right? So continuing down a list here, how do you view effort? Well, if you have a fixed mindset, effort is kind of got a negative view. Extra effort won't improve anything because your ability is fixed. But in growth mindset, a little extra effort is worth it because something might change and you can improve. Do you seek challenges? Well, in a fixed mindset, you might avoid challenges because challenges that are surpassing your ability, which is in fact fixed according to your belief, won't make you look smart, it'll make you look dumb. But in a growth mindset, if your goal is really to learn and improve, then new challenges might be sought out because that helps you achieve that goal. What about change? With a fixed mindset, change can be a threat. Versus a growth mindset, change or trying something new can be an opportunity. Response to criticism, again, fixed mindset, you might be a little more defensive, growth, more learning oriented. Response to setbacks, fixed, more helpless, growth, you might be more resilient. And then persistence in the face of failure. If you fail and you believe your ability can't be improved anyway, then you might just move on. But growth mindset, you say, all right, I'm going to see if I can learn and try again. Now, you can kind of feel the vibe going between these two things. And it is interesting to know that people do, in fact, have fixed or growth mindsets for various kinds of capabilities or abilities they have in their lives. Now, you might be matching this already up against surveys or other work you do with executives. And so part of the question is, can surveys lead to improvement, or is your ability to act on surveys kind of fixed? So more specifically with survey growth, growth mindset and surveys, how do we deal with executives' beliefs? Well, a growth mindset with regard to surveys involves fundamental beliefs that organizational climate, culture, and leadership can in fact be improved, that surveys are valid indicators of these kinds of that efforts to improve can be reflected in future survey results, right? So scores can go up based on things that I do. And in fact, that lack of movement in scores might be related more to ineffective efforts as opposed to ineffective survey programs. So this is kind of what a growth mindset would be with regard to surveys. Now, a side note, you might be wondering, is a growth mindset always valid? For example, point B, are surveys always valid indicators? No, you could have a bad survey. Or point A, are there things that are seriously hard to change about climate, culture, leadership, and so forth? Yeah, sure. Hold this thought. We can't always assume that all these things are true in every case, but we will be bundling these things together as a definition of a growth mindset with regard to surveys. So, second in mind, I'm going to go to the second related concept that's out in the psychological literature called prevention versus promotion. And this is related and will sound awfully similar, but it's not exactly. And so bear with me as I walk through this. These are two ways to think about a challenge. Prevention is when you're focused on not losing. You might be concentrating on staying safe. You might worry about what goes wrong if you don't work hard enough or careful enough. You might be vigilant. You're playing not to lose. You might be focused on maintaining a status quo. And while you might be more risk averse in general, you might also be more thorough and more accurate in how you conduct your activities. And in that way, you're kind of slow or meticulous. These are not all bad. Some can in fact be good or very called for based on the situation. And certainly, you think about in a pandemic situation here with shelter in place rules and other kinds of things, the need to concentrate on staying safe is absolutely up towards the top of everybody's goals and what everybody's thinking about. Let me contrast this for a second to promotion, which is focused on winning. Goals are a path to gain or a path to advancement. You're focusing on rewards and what you might get rather than what you could lose. You're comfortable with taking chances. You work quickly, dream big, think creatively, which all can be great. But at the same time, you might be a little bit more prone to error, less likely to think things through. You might be unprepared with a plan B because you're so optimistic about plan A and that ought to work. And to you, if you're in this kind of a mindset, maybe the worst thing is a chance not taken. So if this does sound a little like growth versus fixed mindsets, it is. But some of these different shades of blue could be really valuable, and the vocabulary can set up some different framing with regard to survey efforts or things that you do. So let me move to that. If we think about prevention versus promotion and survey work particularly, right? You say, all right, if I'm an executive, what do I want a survey to do for me and for my organization? Well, if I'm in a prevention mindset, I'm focused on not losing. I might view a survey as valuable for diagnosing problems, and it should be there to find hot spots. And my action might be focused on the low scoring items or the groups that are below average or below norms or something where I want to bring everything up maybe more to the middle, right? So you can think about this also with regard to promotion, where you might be focused on winning, where a survey is not diagnosing problems. It's for driving new conversations about things important to you and driving some action. And reporting should highlight not just the low spots, but how anybody can improve. And action will focus on those groups that might advance the cause of the organization as a whole, not just the lowest scores. So again, kind of similar, but a little different than the growth versus fixed mindset. So bear with me for one last while I move to this third concept called loss aversion. Loss aversion is something that comes from some work by Tversky and Kahneman that many of you might have heard of. They're all about decision making. They're behavioral economists, and they become amazingly influential. And loss aversion is something related to prospect theory, and it's really simple and yet a profound observation. And what it basically says is that people prefer avoiding losses as opposed to acquiring the equivalent gains. What does that mean? That means it's better not to lose $5 than to find $5. And in fact, part of the really profound part that the research has shown is that the threat of loss can have 2 times the impact as the benefit of gain. And so let me give you an example. If I am given a choice of 2 options, the option A is I might lose $5. Option B is I might gain some money. What all of this says is that I might have to have a chance of gain as high as $10 before I want that second option of gain or see that as equally attractive as avoiding the loss of $5, right? So again, how do we think about loss aversion and surveys? So I'm going to blend some of these concepts together, some of the other concepts, the mindsets we've had along with this loss or gain. So let's say you're in a fixed or prevention mindset where gain or loss is really defined by the scores on the survey. What does that mean? Well, you know, if you're an executive and the threat of decline is strong, then loss aversion kicks in. Right? So if you believe, now it's just not a great time to survey because our scores are going to be low. I'm sure that you've all heard that before. Then loss aversion kicks in and it's like, well, how are we going to deal with that? We'll get to that in a moment. But what if you have a growth or promotion mindset? Then gain or loss is not defined by the scores, but it's defined by your ability to learn or improve. Like, am I going to learn from this? versus is this going to be a waste of time and I'm going to learn nothing? That's kind of the loss. So these first couple of mindsets really have a little twist when it comes to this loss aversion, right? And so one of the things that you want to be thinking about too is which would you rather chase in your jobs and what you do or who you talk to? Would you rather support executives with a growth or promotion mindset or with a fixed or prevention mindset? It's a little easier to say, gosh, I'd rather support those with the growth and promotion mindset because I might be able to control more about what people learn. I might not be able to control my whole organization's scores and whether they go up or down, but learning, I can do that. Reality of it is you don't always get which to choose which you chase. Your hand is dealt to you by the executives that you have to work with. So let me give a summary midpoint here in the talk about how we can think of two broad buckets, right? Where you can think of executives that are more likely to embrace a survey challenge because they have a growth mindset, a promotion mindset, and see more of a chance for gain. You can also see execs that might avoid a survey challenge because they have a fixed mindset, maybe prevention mindset, or see more of a chance for loss. So I'm bundling these kinds of things together. I think my dissertation advisor might be a little sad that I'm a little sloppy with the vocabulary here, but I think it's useful to think about these in terms of two broad buckets. One side point, as you think about coaching and working with executives, of course, no executive is cleanly or always on one side or the other. Certainly people can vary day to day. Maybe pre-pandemic, I'm focused on growth and promotion and see all kinds of chance for gain, but maybe during the pandemic, things have changed. The world is different, and I might be a little bit more about a fixed mindset and preventing loss and preventing things that are bad to happen. I might be more cautious. That's fine. Another way that executives might be not cleanly on one side or the other is if you've got a CEO, let's say with a particular discipline, an original discipline, maybe came from finance, then that person might have a growth mindset with regard to finance issues, but might be in a different mindset with regard to can leadership change, HR initiatives in general, or HR metrics or surveys in particular, right? So no executive will always be one side or the other. That's going to be actually something you can use later on. We'll get to that. Second is individuals, can be one mindset for finance, another for HR, kind of like what I said, or the tendencies can be mixed across top leadership. You're going to be working with a team, not just a single individual, and not everybody's going to be in the same place. That makes it interesting when you listen to conversations and you suddenly realize that people are coming from different mindsets. That might help you structure and help them orchestrate their own conversations. But even given all that, the CEO and the CHRO mindsets are going to be the most pivotal. So, I mentioned shades of gray. This kind of illustrated by a point here where I learned this a long time ago. There's two kinds of people in this world. Those who think there are two kinds of people and those who do not. Now, it's kind of a silly thing to say, but it is profound at the same time about our tendency to bucket people into simple groups. So just be aware and be alert to that the world is never as simple as we sometimes want it to be, or as sometimes webinars might initially describe them to be. All this said, how do you deal with this? Well, one first step is to evaluate your mindset landscape with regard to surveys. And so what's your scene? I'm about to list out some factors that you might be able to rate from wherever you sit in the organization. And these have been identified by OrgVitality consultants in conversations with clients or others in the marketplace that we interact with. And the goal of these is to know what differentiates success from failure. And you will hear echoes of growth mindset, prevention versus promotion, and loss aversion in these. So what are these? And these will be in the materials that can get sent out to you after today, so don't feel the need to scribble really quickly. but I'll walk through them quickly. One, executives feel the point of surveys is to find and fix problems more than it is to improve. Executives feel that results styles, right? You get graded as an A, B, or C, an evaluation of performance, rather than a challenge to learn. With bad results, first reactions are about how to spin or explain those results to the rest of the organization at large or to the board of directors or whomever. Improvements are, quote, because we are good, but declines are, oh, because of that one specific thing. I will, clue you in, this actually was a concept that was very familiar to me. I went to grad school, as Jeff said, at Ohio State, and they can be really rabid football fans. And it was very clear to an outsider who's sort of a moderate football fan, but not rabid. Ohio State always lost because of that one penalty or that one kick or that one something, but they won simply because they won, especially if we were playing Michigan. Now, continuing down the list that you can evaluate, the reaction in the face of no change or declines is to change a survey system. Or maybe there needs to be a lot of careful upward management about leadership or HR related issues, and you attend very carefully to the personalities at play as you couch things to them. Executives do not reference surveys unless they're prompted by HR business partners or others. Or survey in action always has a reason or excuse. Well, we didn't do that because of the pandemic, or we didn't do that because of something else that was happening. And by that time, maybe the data is too old. We also have executives need to know how to fix an issue before committing to it as a challenge to address, right? You see how that's reflective of a fixed mindset or maybe loss aversion. And then even without surveys, executives demonstrate efforts to improve the work environment. So this we would say is a positive thing and actually would be reverse scored. When more of those executives talk about surveys in their own words and don't simply restate the standard HR lines, right? So everybody knows that engagement's important. It's like, if you don't hear it in an executive's voice, that's a little bit of a sign that maybe they're not really integrating everything that you're trying to do. So as you stare at a list like this, you might not have a clear sense of all, but you might discover a leaning or two, and maybe there's one or two items here that have an extra compelling or resonance with you, or already suggest some conversations you could have. And that's the point. So a little bit of diagnosis, and then once you've thought through that a little bit, what do you do? And so in the last bit here of this webinar, I'm going to talk about what to do. And so there's a couple of ways that we can focus. The first way we're going to say is, like, how do you focus on changing mindsets? And I'm going to start by recognizing that it's hard. It is hard to change mindsets, especially with leaders who've gotten to a place in an organization because they were very good at least some things. And so how do you convince them to change that? It's all about leadership development, and we all know that's hard. I'm going to start with a do not. Do not just tell leaders to have a growth mindset. Partly because everybody already thinks that they have one. And frankly, they probably do, just maybe not with regard to surveys or with regard to culture, climate, HR, leadership styles, and so forth, right? So that's the do not. Well, what do you do? Number one, you can provide a little bit of learning about mindsets and frames and address beliefs head on. You can use some of the points here. Carol Dweck actually has a great TED talk that is on growth mindset, and so just sending somebody a link is already a place to start. But just making vocabulary about this and calling these out as something that you can do. Next, celebrate mistakes and the productive struggle and make them public. You can highlight how learning and growth mindsets are rewarded and they succeed in the long run. And hopefully you might be able to also say that no one ever gets beat up for just playing low scores. Sometimes people do get beat up, all right, fine, but at least let's figure out how to celebrate the mistakes and make the preponderance of the story that people hear and talk about more about going for it and learning something. Related, you can assess and recognize learning, not just performance. You can set learning goals, for example, not simply SMART goals. SMART goals that we all know, specific, measurable, actionable, got resources, time bound, all that stuff. Those are good, but they're good for doing activities that people already kind of know how to do. They're great for operational or in-the-box tasks. They're less good with creative exploration. And for a lot of leaders in a lot of organizations, acting on survey results is not the regular day-to-day job. It's not as familiar. And so having goals to learn might be better than specific SMART goals of what to do about it. Then I think really important is to just press through it. You can say, look, as you get experience, as this unfolds, as we increase our organizational discipline here, you're going to feel less than effective. You're going to feel less than efficient. And everybody's super busy and everybody loves feeling efficient. But it's like, this is one of those cases where, yeah, as we figure this out, let's just ask for a little tolerance. And then also remember that the mindset that your executives might have about your survey is not synonymous with their mindset overall. And you can invoke other domains of expertise, like the CEO whose original discipline is finance. You could try to port some of that finance growth mindset mojo into HR. Okay, so this is what to do about focus on changing mindsets. All right, what if you can't really change mindsets? What do? Well, you focus on working with what you got, and there's always going to be some of this. And the first do not is, do not depend on versions of, oh, just try harder, or even logic. You cannot use the fist-pounding HR, imploring plea that it's like, it's for the people and it's really important. That, sounds good and it's logical and it's true after some fashion, but these beliefs, these mindsets are more powerful than a basic message when you sort of show up, say something that nobody can disagree with and then walk away, right? So don't just depend on those messages. What you got to do is learn the executives' mindsets. What is their sense of gains or loss risk, right? You can evaluate what keeps them awake at night, maybe with those kinds of statements a couple of slides back, and then lean into their preconceptions and work with them. What does keep them awake at night? Where are they hyper concerned with loss? Where are they feeling more free to learn? And then match that up against the survey's goals, and then move from there. You can also frame the survey's own voice, right? So you can set it up as a positive or game tool to do what they already want to do. Where are they already focused on gain as opposed to loss, right? Is it, hey, we need to work better cross-functionally with our engineers and our frontline service and sales folks to co-create better solutions with clients, whatever. But if that's it, you could say, all right, how do we make the survey lean into that vocabulary that already pre-exists? That helps executives understand and lean into the survey as well. Next, you can create gain or loss narratives that work with, not against, mindsets. There is research to show that inspirational stories of success work better with growth or promotion mindset, but cautionary tales of woe work better with fixed or prevention mindsets. For example, on the first one, you can identify groups with the organization who've created successful transformations based on what they've learned from the scores and so forth. All that's going to work great, but it's going to work better if you've already got growth or promotion mindsets. Now, on the other hand, a cautionary tale, let's say that you've got a certain group that's critical to execute on a strategy, like a product development group or a sales delivery channel or somebody that's doing something new. And you go to executives and say, hey, you don't want to be blindsided by high turnover in this particular part of your organization. or you don't want to be blindsided by cross-functional breakdowns or whatever it is. That kind of a thing is a different kind of story, and it works better, again, with fixed or prevention mindsets. So once you understand where you are, you can adjust your messaging to match. Also, again, ask for tolerance for feelings of frustration and lack of efficiency. And in this way, it's not just, hey, we're going to be inefficient as we learn. This would be, hey, I want to have you have a little bit more of a tolerance for risk of loss. We know that that's a problem. We know that it's at risk, but let's talk about what kind of tolerance we have here. And then also remember, not all executives will be in the same frame. Find an ally with a growth mindset regarding surveys. And it might not always be the CHRO, it could be somebody else. And sometimes finding that somebody else and becoming their buddy is one of the best things you could do, because it's not just an HR issue. Okay, I want to go slightly on a sidebar for a minute. I did tee up a question before. Was a growth mindset for surveys always the valid one? And so this sidebar is, you know, do you have a problem or a challenge with a mindset issue? Or really, is it a problem with reality? And what do we know? Well, we do know, hey, sometimes loss aversion is in fact the right choice. Shelter in place is trying to avoid loss. And let's say right now, and maybe it'll take 10 years to figure it out, but let's say that's the right choice. You know, or similarly, sometimes throwing more effort at a growth challenge is not the right thing to do, okay? It's not something that we feel is important at this time. Remember that radar, you know, you've got leadership with finite resources. They might see brick wall challenges. How do you decide to spend their attention? And how do you know if it is a problem with mindset or a problem with reality? Here's some clues when you may want to change up some parts of your survey program. If there are no topics in the survey that naturally and automatically address what keeps executives awake at night, that might be an issue. Like if the survey only has topics that maybe executives feel should be there because they're HR tolerant people and yada, 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 and it's what you feel should be there. But if it's not there automatically, knee-jerk, just take note of that. If you can't hear the CEO's voice in the survey questions being asked, that can also be kind of a problem. You know, there's one example sometimes that we talk about, whereas if you had everybody here on the webinar, if you threw all of your surveys into a big pile in the middle of the virtual room here, could somebody rationally look at these, you know, if it was an informed party, and sort them back to the places where they came from correctly? If they can't, if your survey gets confused with somebody else's, particularly if they're in a completely different industry, facing completely different challenges, that might be a problem. Next, if you're in a situation where the scores most scrutinized by the organization, like an employment or like an engagement index, are among the highest scores in the survey, there's not a lot of room for that to move. There's not a lot of new learnings about that sometimes. So, you know, sometimes it's a caution tale to maybe do something else. Or maybe if the survey results have not changed despite good effort, you know, maybe step back and say, are we measuring something that is not really reflective of the actions we most want to be taking? And then finally, sometimes you might have executives where their organizational transformation aspirations or their stated goals for the survey are in fact unreasonable or disconnected from strategy. You may, for example, know, and this is a stylized example, of course, but like an East Coast bank says, well, we want to be as innovative as a Silicon Valley tech firm. You know, that sounds good, but break it down, and is it really important for that East Coast bank strategy? That's a different kind of retail channels with maybe different sort of conservative investment needs that they have versus, you know, a free-flowing, who cares if we fail kind of innovative tech skunk works. Validate, you know, it might be right if somebody does have a crazy aspiration, and audacity is a good thing, but it needs to not just be knee-jerk, and it needs to be a little checked. So anyway, after this sidebar, this moves us into our next and final real piece of advice in terms of what to do, which is focus on changing the survey program. we cannot sit back and always assume that we've got the right thing. You want to acknowledge that there's a chance that fixed or prevention mindsets or loss aversion might be valid for the situation. Change is hard. I think we know this. And so all of this, you step back and evaluate the survey program. And I'm going to run through these pretty quickly. You know, does it uniquely capture executive interests, not simply traditional topics? Does it help you tell a story of results that's connected to the business? Now, I'm not just talking about linkage research that might statistically link employee opinions to outcomes of interest, not just employee turnover, maybe productivity or sales or customer loyalty or something like that. That's great. That has huge value. But I think even more important is the story of the survey connected to the business in the way that, are they in the same buckets in executive brains, right? Statistics are one thing, but you know, do they spout from the same places in an executive's brain? That's where you want to drive. Next, executive focus is actually directed at plausible scores that might really change with room to grow. You know, you can look at yourself. A lot of people want pride in their organization. That's great. You know, I want to be in a place where I have pride, but sometimes pride is already super high. And as a score and as an action focus, it doesn't really drive the things that the organization really needs to differentiate itself maybe from its competitors. But you can also say, is there earnest effort properly supported, you know, is in fact maintained by executives, even when you're out of the room? You know, if so, that's awesome. And then that's great. If not, you know, there might be some more support you can provide. And, you know, does the program meet executive mindset needs? Even if they have risk aversion, you know, loss aversion, is that covered? And if so, you know, that's a valid need maybe, and then your program is good. If not, then you can sort of step back and squint and say, what do we do? So with all of this happening here, I've just reviewed 3 sort of psychological principles: growth mindset, promotion versus prevention, loss aversion, and tried to relate those to how executives think about surveys and action planning and organizational change in general. And we've reviewed ways to assess or evaluate where those executives are. And what I did is I just covered some of the what to do, where, you know, the 3 broad categories are, you know, focus on changing mindsets, focus on working with what you've got with those executive mindsets, and then maybe focus on, are there tweaks to survey content, to messaging, to presentations or analysis in your survey program, or support for action planning that might make sense. So I know we've just covered a lot. I know this is kind of dense. I know it's probably hitting a few things that you might already have known about or encountered in your travels and so forth. So let me pause. I think we have time for, you know, 5-10 minutes of questions before everybody needs to move on to the next thing. So if you do have questions or want to submit a top takeaway or thought, you can enter it into the Q&A box that Zoom here has. So Jeff, I don't know if any questions have been coming in so far, but
well, let's give people a moment to ask any questions they might have. By the way, if your Q&A little box isn't there, if you move your cursor down to the bottom of the screen, it should just pop right up, and that's where you put any questions you might have. But Scott, as I listen to this, you know, I'm struck with the different types, and obviously with 3 concepts and 2 different types in each, you know, the possible combinations are, you know, numerous, not just the 2 buckets. But is this a, you know, if you were putting together an organization, is there a selection component to this kind of thing, or would you just say, you know, organizations need a mix of all different kinds?
Well, you know, let me kind of break that down into 2 things. Number one, are there enduring traits here that might transcend situation, that might float with people across different jobs, different tasks, different kinds of things? And I think like a lot of things, yeah, there is. There are some mindsets like about your ability to learn that have a certain stickiness even since, you know, elementary school. Now, that's not to say that that's true in all aspects of your life, and it's not to say they can't change, but there are selection tests and things like that. It's not really my area of expertise, but there is some selection for fixed versus fluid mindset, you know, and that kind of thing. But I think the other thing is like, what's appropriate? You know, like these days, is risk aversion appropriate? And it's like, yeah, risk aversion run amok, we need to sort of watch and be careful of. But pandemic is setting up some serious risk aversion, and we need to evaluate that compared to the situation. So I think there is some executive selection, right, that can get into this. I think there's certainly some leadership development kind of programs that try to address this very head on. So it's a combination, like a lot of things of the nature and the nurture.
So if you were to walk into a client and you were trying to figure out who am I dealing with? Am I dealing with someone with a growth mindset or not? Am I, you know, those kind of things. How would you go about assessing, say, the CHRO of an organization? What would be the
kinds of questions?
The tells, if you will, in terms of what kind of person am I dealing with?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I would take us back to adaptations of these points, right? And I would also say that you can go out and buy like Carol Dweck's book on growth mindsets, and she's got, you know, an assessment in there on basically learning agility. Sometimes they call that kind of thing, or other things like that. But the first thing I would do, and you could swap out the word surveys in these items for something else, you know, organizational change, or, you know, response to COVID-19 or whatever it is. But work through some things like this. This is not an explicit mindset evaluation of how different mindsets might relate to a specific kind of change effort you're trying to undertake. And so if I were just going in with, you know, to a new CHRO, I might sort of listen for some of these things ahead of time. I might have conversations where I might explicitly ask about these kinds of things, right? So how do you feel about surveys? You know, what's your experience in the past? Fix problems or improve, you know, that kind of thing. But it is, I think trying to listen and diagnose for it is like you're talking about. It's the first step.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think we're really out of time. If anybody else has any questions, would like to submit them, I'm sure Scott would be very happy to compose an email and get back to you with that. And Scott, do you want to wrap up with any summary information?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. Some of you might have heard, but OrgVitality has been offering a free employee wellness and well-being and business resilience survey that we're trying to collect some norms on, and we're going to offer those up. And if you just want to use the items and survey it in whatever way you want, that's fine. But the goal here is to help us, you know, as a society understand a little bit better how organizations are responding. I will say it's very interesting. A lot of scores tend to be pretty high these days. People are giving leadership typically a lot of credit and leeway as they become humanized through this crisis, and you know, the best ones step up to a challenge and are looking pretty good. So anyway, we've also extended this into 13 languages, and we can update that count as needed. But I just wanted to highlight that, and then stay tuned. In just a few, about 10 minutes, we'll be starting up, as Jeff mentioned, a session on GDPR and privacy regulations and so forth like that, whoever's interested. But
and if you haven't yet registered, for that session or would like to register for the one after that at 4:15, you can just go to our website and click on the conference, and registration just takes a few seconds and you can get right in.
Sure. But, you know, I do think that the mindset kind of thing is useful. I'm sure you've all worked with different executive teams and kind of know that the personalities of them can swing pretty dramatically and can make your life easier or harder. And trying to dig into that personality beyond just saying, oh, they like surveys or they don't, into the mindset kinds of issues described here, hopefully can become valuable for you. So again, leadership is hard, and disconnected, strange things sometimes filter down. So how do we understand that? And hopefully this gives you an angle on interpreting your own organizations.
Well, thanks for attending today's session. And as Scott said, the next one starts in about 9 minutes now. Any final goodbye, Scott?
No, just everybody stay safe, and definitely reach out if you got any follow-up questions.
Thanks for coming, guys. Bye-bye.